The first sound was the sharp hiss of a cigarette being lit. Then came the stinging trail of smoke that drifted lazily into the air, curling around the crystal chandelier above. The room was silent, too silent, except for the muffled breathing of the woman bound to the chair. Her wrists were tied tight behind her back, the silk rope cutting into her skin until it burned. Blood had dried at the corner of her mouth, her bottom lip split open from the backhand that had silenced her screams only moments ago. Her right eye was swollen, the color of ripening plums spreading across her cheek. And standing before her, in his tailored black suit and silk tie, was Ha-joon. The man the world saw as a polished, commanding businessman. The man she knew as a monster. He dragged from his cigarette and exhaled slowly, watching her as though she were a piece of art he had just ruined on purpose. His gaze was cold, detached, the kind of look a butcher gives a carcass after the knife has done its work. "You should learn," Ha-joon murmured in Korean, his tone soft but deadly. "Every bruise is a lesson. And every lesson means you belong to me a little more." He flicked ash onto the marble floor, turned his back to her, and strolled toward the heavy oak door. The locks clicked, and as if on cue, the door opened again. A team entered, 3 women, moving briskly, not daring to meet her eyes. They carried silver cases, brushes, palettes, gowns draped in plastic. Without a word, they set to work. One of them dabbed at the blood with cold cotton, muttering about not letting it clot too visibly. Another brushed concealer over the swollen eye, layering powder until the bruises faded beneath the illusion of smooth skin. The third knelt to slip her bruised feet into delicate heels, fastening the straps like a servant dressing a doll. It wasn't the first time. This was routine. Every time Ha-joon decided to punish her, the artists were summoned. Every time, they turned her into something presentable, a woman who looked like she belonged on the arm of a powerful man. The world would never guess what hid beneath the foundation, the contour, the diamonds draped around her neck. Tonight was no different. When they were done, she looked into the gilded mirror they placed before her. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger. Smooth skin, red lips, flawless hair swept into an elegant bun. The perfect Mafia wife. But she could still taste the iron of blood on her tongue. By the time they arrived at the banquet hall, the mask was in place. The chandeliers sparkled. The scent of expensive wine filled the air, and laughter floated across the room. Investors, politicians, and businessmen mingled in polished suits and glittering gowns. Deals worth millions were being whispered over glasses of champagne. And at the center of it all was Ha-joon, tall, composed, his hand resting with deceptive gentleness on her lower back as he guided her through the crowd. Every time someone approached, he smiled warmly, introduced her as my wife, and let his colleagues admire her beauty. They praised her elegance, her grace. None of them knew the bruises hidden beneath the silk gown. She kept her smile steady, her voice soft, every movement calculated. Years of survival had taught her that even here, in public, she was never safe. They sat at a long mahogany table, the wine flowing, the laughter louder. Ha-joon placed a firm hand on her thigh, beneath the tablecloth. His grip was not affectionate. It was possessive, commanding. She froze, her fork hovering above the plate. He leaned toward her ear, his lips brushing her skin in what seemed like an intimate whisper. "Smile wider," Ha-joon murmured. "You look tired. Don't embarrass me." Her smile stretched, aching at the corners. The men across the table chuckled, raising their glasses in approval. One of them even remarked, "You're a lucky man. She's stunning." Lucky. If only they knew. Ha-joon pressed harder on her thigh, fingers digging in, reminding her who she belonged to. Her chest tightened, but her laughter joined theirs, light and delicate, another performance in the theater of survival. As the evening dragged on, the room blurred around her. Conversations about power, territories, and hidden threats filled the air, none of which she was allowed to comment on. She was there for one reason: to look beautiful, to prove Ha-joon's dominance, to hide his sins beneath her flawless exterior. When dessert arrived, she excused herself to the restroom. She locked the door, pressed her hands against the marble sink, and stared into the mirror. The makeup was holding. The mask was perfect. But her eyes betrayed her. They burned with something she hadn't felt in months. Something dangerous. Not just pain. Not just despair. But a flicker of rebellion. She couldn't keep living like this. Not forever. She closed her eyes and breathed. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the bruises, beneath the silence, a thought began to grow like a seed planted in the dark. A thought of freedom. A thought of revenge. And though she did not yet know how, she swore silently that one day, she would not be the one wearing the mask. She would be the one tearing it off. The memory of that night haunted her more than the bruises. Long before she became Ha-joon's caged bride, long before the bruises were covered in powder and diamonds, there had been her father's trembling hands, his broken voice, and the Mafia men who came to their doorstep. It had been a humid evening in Lagos. The generator hummed in the background, and the street outside pulsed with the sounds of hawkers calling out, children laughing, and motorbikes roaring past. She had been preparing dinner, beans simmering in a pot, when the banging came at the door. Not a polite knock. A pounding. Her father froze. "Stay inside," he muttered to her and her younger brother, his voice laced with fear. But it was too late. The door burst open, hinges screeching as two men in dark suits and sharp shoes stepped inside. They did not look like they belonged to Lagos. Their faces were sharp, their accents clipped, their presence suffocating. One of them pulled her father by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "You thought you could run from us?" the man hissed. "Chairman Ha-joon does not forget debts." Her father fell to his knees, begging in Yoruba, then in broken English. Please, give me time.
Just a little more time."
Business is bad. I will pay." But the man in the suit laughed, cold and cruel. "Time is finished. The chairman is patient, but patience has a limit. Do you want your son's body to pay instead?" Her brother cried out, and she instinctively stepped in front of him, shielding him. Her chest tightened as the man's eyes fell on her. He tilted his head, studying her face, as though he had just discovered something useful. "This one," he said slowly, pointing at her. "She is valuable." Her father's head snapped up.
"No."
"Please." "Chairman Ha-joon is generous," the man interrupted. "Your debt can be cleared, but she comes with us." The world blurred. Her mother's distant sobs, her father's frantic protests, her brother's cries, all drowned beneath the cold finality of those words. That was the night she was taken. The wedding was not a celebration. It was a transaction. She wore white silk, but there was no joy in it. The church was decorated, but the flowers smelled like death. A few witnesses were present, syndicate men in dark suits, smiling thinly, as though the ceremony were a private joke. Ha-joon stood at the altar, flawless in his tailored suit, eyes sharp and unreadable. He looked at her not with love, not even with interest, but with the detached air of a man acquiring property. When the priest asked if she would take this man as her husband, her lips trembled. But one look at the gun resting casually in the hand of one of Ha-joon's men silenced her hesitation. I do." Her voice broke. Ha-joon's own vow was smooth, commanding. His Korean accent wrapped around the English words like silk over steel. "I do." When he slid the ring onto her finger, his grip was firm, almost painful, as though he was staking a claim rather than making a promise. The kiss was no kiss. It was a warning. His mouth pressed hard against hers, suffocating, leaving her breathless, not with romance, but with dread. Her wedding night was worse. The penthouse suite in Seoul was lavish, the city lights glittering like diamonds beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows. But the beauty of it all meant nothing when Ha-joon entered the room, removed his jacket, and loosened his tie. She stood at the edge of the bed, trembling. "You belong to me now," he said simply. His tone was casual, as though stating a fact. He approached slowly, each step deliberate, like a predator closing in. Her voice was small, almost pleading. "Please, I never asked for this." His hand struck her before she finished. The sound echoed in the room. She staggered, her cheek burning. "You do not speak unless I allow it," Hajjun said, his eyes as sharp as blades. Lesson 1. Tears blurred her vision, but she did not scream. Screaming, she sensed, would only excite him further. That night, she realized she was not a wife. She was property. The days that followed cemented it. Her new home was a palace and a prison all at once. Gold-lined corridors, chandeliers, velvet curtains, but guards at every door, surveillance cameras in every hall. She could not leave without Ha-joon's permission. She could not speak to the staff unless he allowed it. Every mistake, every word, every glance was punished. If she did not smile at the right moment, his hand would grip her wrist until she cried out. If she faltered in front of his associates, he would whisper cruel threats against her family. And if she ever dared to resist, the punishments grew harsher. At dinner one evening, when she failed to answer a question quickly enough, he leaned close to her ear. "You think your father saved you?" His whisper was like ice.
He sold you.
"He gave you to me. You belong to me more than you ever belonged to him." The humiliation was constant. In front of his colleagues, Ha-joon would caress her cheek, press his lips to hers, and call her my jewel. To the world, he was a loving husband. To her, his every touch was another chain tightening around her neck. Behind closed doors, he reminded her daily, "Your father's debt is your cage, and you will never leave it." Sometimes, she would wake in the middle of the night, her chest heaving, tears streaming silently down her face. She would glance at the sleeping form beside her, the powerful Mafia boss whose arm was draped across her as if she were nothing but a possession. She wanted to scream. She wanted to claw his face. She wanted to run. But she remembered her family back in Lagos. Her brother's wide, frightened eyes. Her father's defeated silence. Ha-joon's men had made it clear. If she disobeyed, if she ran, her family would pay. So she stayed. She smiled when told. She obeyed when commanded. She played the role of the perfect wife, while inside she withered, piece by piece. Yet, in the darkest corners of her mind, something stirred. Not hope. Hope was too soft. Something harder, sharper, a quiet rage. It whispered to her as she looked at Ha-joon's reflection in the mirror, his smile as flawless as the suit he wore. One day, the rage whispered. One day, this will end. The house was alive, but she was dead within it. Every morning began the same. The locks clicked open at dawn, the sound of guards switching posts outside her door. Breakfast was served on a silver tray, steaming bowls of rice, soup, and fresh fruit, but she was only allowed to eat after Ha-joon had finished his own. If he chose to rise late, she starved until he permitted otherwise. The mansion itself was a fortress. 10 bedrooms, crystal chandeliers, marble staircases, rooms filled with expensive art. But to her, it was nothing but a gilded cage. She wasn't allowed to walk beyond the garden. She wasn't allowed to call her family. She wasn't allowed to step outside without guards at her side, their presence a constant reminder that freedom was a dream long dead. When she once asked, timidly, if she could visit a library in Seoul, Ha-joon only laughed. "Books," he scoffed, running his thumb along her jawline. "You don't need books. Everything you need to know, I'll teach you." And then he pressed her chin harder until her teeth clamped against her tongue. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. The rules were endless, carved into her soul by pain. She could not raise her voice. She could not look directly at Ha-joon unless spoken to. She could not ask questions about his business. She could never, under any circumstance, speak to outsiders without his permission. When she broke the rules, the punishments varied. Sometimes it was silence, days of him ignoring her existence, a cruelty that left her gasping for acknowledgement like a child desperate for air. Sometimes it was words, sharp and venomous, reminding her she was property, reminding her that her family was alive only because of him. And sometimes it was violence. Bruises bloomed on her skin like purple flowers. A slap for answering too slowly. A shove for flinching when he touched her. A closed fist for daring to resist him in the bedroom. Yet she was always forced to smile, always forced to look pristine. Ha-joon controlled even her appearance. After punishments, he summoned his team of stylists, makeup artists, hairdressers, designers. They came like clockwork, covering swollen cheeks with foundation, painting red lips over cracked ones, dressing her in gowns that sparkled under chandeliers. "You're my jewel," Ha-joon would murmur, adjusting a diamond necklace around her throat before a dinner party. His words were soft, but his grip left bruises hidden beneath the glittering stones. To his investors, his colleagues, his rivals, she was the perfect wife, elegant, submissive, beautiful. None of them knew that beneath the silk gloves, her hands sometimes trembled from fear. None of them saw the pain in her eyes when he pressed her thigh under the table, controlling her every movement with the slightest touch. It was during one of those nights, when her mascara was streaking with tears in the bathroom, that she first noticed him. The man who lingered in shadows but always seemed to notice her. His name was Min-jun. He was one of Ha-joon's enforcers, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from stone. His presence was intimidating, sharp suits, cold eyes, the kind of aura that made weaker men step aside. He had been with Ha-joon for years, his right hand, his trusted sword. But unlike the others, Min-jun looked at her differently. Not with lust, not with pity, but with something she couldn't name at first. The first kindness came quietly. It was after punishment, when she had been locked in her room for 2 days without food. Her stomach clawed at itself, her lips cracked with thirst. She was curled on the floor, whispering to herself to stay alive, when she heard a soft knock. The door creaked open just slightly. A tray slid across the floor, rice, kimchi, and a bottle of water. She looked up, startled, but no one entered. Only when the footsteps faded did she dare approach. On the tray was a folded napkin. When she opened it, her breath caught. The words were scrawled in rough handwriting. "Eat quickly. Don't let him know." Her eyes burned with tears. Someone knew. Someone cared. After that, she began to notice the small things Min-jun did. When Ha-joon's temper was simmering, Min-jun would pass by her door, his glance alone a warning. Stay silent tonight. When she made small mistakes in front of guests, accidentally dropping a wine glass, forgetting Ha-joon's cue, Min-jun was there, quick to intervene, turning attention away from her before Ha-joon's fury could fall. One evening, Ha-joon had nearly struck her in front of associates. Min-jun stepped forward smoothly, distracting him with urgent business matters. Her punishment was postponed, and once, when she tried to carry groceries in the kitchen, her hands shaking, Min-jun took the bags from her silently, his expression unreadable. But she noticed the gentleness in the way he set them down, so unlike the cruelty of the others. It was dangerous to notice him, even more dangerous to acknowledge him. But the silence of her captivity was suffocating, and the small cracks Min-jun carved into it became her lifeline. She began to wait for those fleeting glances, those subtle warnings. She began to breathe easier when he was near, even if he stood stiff and unapproachable. And then one night it happened. Ha-joon had returned drunk, furious after a business deal soured. She had learned to recognize the signs, the unsteady footsteps, the loosened tie, the glassy eyes. He slammed the door, threw a bottle against the wall, and turned on her. "You bring bad luck," he spat, his words slurred but venomous. "Every time I look at you, I remember the debt. Maybe I should kill your family and end it all." She tried to back away, but his hand closed around her throat. Her nails dug into his wrist, desperate for air, but he only squeezed tighter. Her vision blurred. She thought it was the end. And then suddenly the grip was gone. She collapsed to the floor, gasping, as Ha-joon turned sharply. Min-jun was standing in the doorway, his face expressionless, his voice calm. "Boss, the men are waiting for your orders about the shipment." Ha-joon glared at him, his chest heaving. For a long moment, the room was thick with tension. Then, with a grunt, Ha-joon released her entirely and stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. She stayed on the floor, trembling, clutching her throat. When she finally dared to look up, Min-jun was still there. Their eyes met, and for the first time, She saw it clearly, the thing she hadn't been able to name. It was not pity. It was not lust. It was recognition. Recognition of her suffering. Recognition of his own chains. Two prisoners under the same roof. That night, she couldn't sleep. His face lingered in her mind, his steady voice replaying again and again. The next morning, when she passed him in the hall, something shifted inside her. She lowered her gaze, but her lips moved, whispering so faintly she wasn't sure he even heard it. "Thank you." Min-jun didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. But as she walked away, her heart pounded. For the first time in months, the silence of her captivity wasn't absolute. Confiding in him began slowly. A word here, a glance there. When Ha-joon was away, she lingered in the kitchen, knowing Min-jun sometimes passed through. Once, she murmured about the weather. Another time, she mentioned a song she used to hear back home in Lagos. He never replied directly, but he didn't stop her either. And sometimes his eyes softened, just for a heartbeat, before the mask of the enforcer returned. The first true conversation came on a rainy evening. She had been locked in her room again, punished for answering Hajjun too slowly during dinner. Hours passed, hunger gnawed at her, and she sat by the window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. A quiet knock came. The tray slid inside. Rice, soup, and an apple. But this time, Min-jun didn't leave. He lingered by the door, his voice low.
Eat.
Quickly. Her breath caught. She turned toward him, her hands trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. His eyes flicked to her, sharp and guarded. For a moment, she thought he would ignore her again. But then he said quietly, "Because no one deserves to starve." It wasn't much, but to her it was everything. From that night on, something fragile began between them. Not love.
Not yet, but trust.
A dangerous, forbidden trust. The first kiss was not planned. It was born out of desperation, out of fear, out of a moment so fragile it should have broken them both. It happened after another violent night. Hajjun had returned from a meeting furious, his rage spilling over like boiling oil. He dragged her into their room, shouting about betrayal in his ranks, about money gone missing. She had nothing to do with it, but that had never mattered. By the time he left her crumpled on the floor, her lips split, her arms aching from his grip, she was shaking so hard she couldn't stand. The door clicked shut. She thought she was alone. But then, slowly, it opened again. Min-jun stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room, landing on her broken form. For the first time, he didn't look away. She should have told him to leave. She should have crawled into bed and pretended to sleep. But the silence between them was too heavy, too suffocating. "Why are you still here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He closed the door behind him, not answering. Instead, he knelt beside her, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket. Carefully, almost reverently, he dabbed at the blood on her lip. Her breath hitched. No one had touched her gently in months. Their eyes met. And then, before she could stop herself, she leaned forward, her lips brushing his. It was not a kiss of romance. It was a kiss of survival, of need, of a desperate hunger for human warmth. Min-jun froze. For a moment, she thought he would push her away. But then his hand cupped her face, his mouth claimed hers, and the world around them dissolved. The affair began with stolen moments. A brush of hands in the hallway. A whispered word when Ha-jun's back was turned. The fleeting warmth of lips in a darkened corner of the mansion. Every touch was laced with fear. Every kiss came with the risk of death. But the danger only fueled the fire. She had been starving for tenderness, for acknowledgement, for anything that reminded her she was human. Min-jun, in his quiet strength, became her lifeline. He slipped her food, whispered warnings, shielded her when he could. And now he gave her something more, something Ha-jun had never given her.
Choice.
In his arms, she was not property.
She was not debt.
She was not a jewel to be displayed or a slave to be punished. She was a woman. Yet, guilt was a constant shadow. Each time they parted, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her chest tight. Ha-joon's face haunted her, not out of love, but out of terror. If he ever discovered the truth, she and Min-jun would not survive. And yet she couldn't stop, because Min-jun was not only her secret lover. He was the first person who dared to see her. One night, lying in the dim light of her room after Ha-joon had left for a meeting, she asked the question that had lingered in her heart. "Why do you stay?" Min-jun's expression darkened. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. "You think I don't ask myself that every day?" he said finally, his voice low, rough. "I was 15 when I came to him.
My family was starving. He took me in, fed me,
Trained me, made me into what I am." His eyes flicked to hers, sharp, haunted. But there's no leaving him. No one leaves Ha-joon alive. Her breath caught. "Then you're as much a prisoner as I am." He gave a humorless laugh.
Worse.
"I built the cage." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then she reached for his hand. "Then maybe we break it together." It started as a whisper, a dangerous thought neither of them dared put into words at first. But over time, the whispers became plans. Late at night, when Ha-joon was out conducting business, she and Min-jun would meet in the shadows of the mansion, their bodies close, their voices low. She told him about the safes in Ha-joon's office, the documents she had seen him lock away. She memorized codes when Ha-joon wasn't looking, the numbers hidden in the corner of her mind. Min-jun told her about shipments, rival gangs, and the vulnerabilities in Ha-joon's empire. Piece by piece, they began to weave a net of betrayal. But betrayal was not easy. The fear of being caught hung over them like a blade. Once, during a dinner with Ha-joon's investors, she felt Min-jun's gaze on her. Just a glance, no more. But her heart raced so violently she dropped her fork. Ha-joon's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she thought it was over. But Min-jun spoke up smoothly. "Boss, the shipment from Busan needs confirmation. I'll handle it." Ha-joon's attention shifted. Her heart kept pounding long after. Their passion deepened with their plotting. Each kiss carried the weight of rebellion. Each touch whispered of freedom. Each stolen embrace was more than desire. It was defiance. But passion was also dangerous. One night, after making love in the servants' quarters, Min-jun pulled her close, his breath hot against her ear. "If he ever finds out, he'll kill you first," he murmured. She swallowed hard. "Then we make sure he doesn't find out. Ever." His grip tightened around her. "I don't care about myself. But you, if he hurts you again." "He already does," she whispered. That silence, that truth, sealed their resolve. The plan crystallized slowly. She would use her position as Ha-joon's wife to access his private documents. Min-jun would use his rank to leak information to rivals and law enforcement. Together, they would weaken him piece by piece until his empire crumbled. But as the plan grew, so did their fear. Every night, she asked herself the same question. Was it worth it? The risk, the betrayal, the blood that would surely follow. But then she remembered the bruises, the cage, the debt. She remembered the way Ha-joon's hand closed around her throat, the way he called her his jewel, as though she were nothing but glass to polish and display. And she knew, yes, it was worth it. The first step came when Ha-joon left her alone in his office one afternoon. "Don't touch anything," he had warned, his voice sharp as he adjusted his cufflinks. She nodded obediently, lowering her eyes. But the moment he stepped out, her heart began to race. She moved quickly, memorizing the papers on his desk, the passwords typed into his computer. Her fingers trembled as she copied numbers onto her palm in pen ink, hiding it under her sleeve. When Min-jun appeared later that night, she pressed the information into his hand. Their fingers brushed. It was the first real step toward Ha-joon's downfall. Every stolen moment after that carried double weight, desire and conspiracy. They whispered in hallways, kissed in dark stairwells, and traded secrets with their lips pressed together. They moved like shadows in a house of glass, knowing one crack could shatter everything. But in their hearts, they clung to the same vision, freedom. For her, for him, even if it came soaked in blood. The plan unfolded in pieces, each step small enough to be invisible, but together, sharp enough to cut through Ha-joon's empire. It began with whispers slipped into the ears of rivals. Shipment routes, coded messages, lists of Ha-joon's safe houses. At first, the leaks seemed like coincidence, a rival gang intercepting one delivery, law enforcement raiding a warehouse. Ha-joon cursed and raged, but suspicion was directed outward. Rats, he spat one night, slamming his fist against the table. Always sniffing around. I'll burn them all. She sat quietly at his side, her hand trembling as she lifted her wine glass. Inside, she was shaking with both fear and exhilaration. The plan was working, but the deeper they went, the heavier the risk became. Every night, Ha-joon's temper grew sharper. He began scrutinizing her every move. When she poured his drink, his eyes followed the tilt of the bottle. When she dressed for dinners, he inspected her jewelry, as though searching for hidden microphones. Once, he grabbed her wrist suddenly, yanking it up to his face. "What's this?" Her heart nearly stopped. Ink still faintly stained her palm from notes she had copied earlier for Min-jun. Ha-joon's gaze narrowed, suspicion flashing in his dark eyes. But after a moment he smirked. "Messy woman," he muttered, wiping her hand with his thumb. "Next time, wash better." She forced a laugh, though her stomach twisted violently. That night, she vomited from the weight of it all. Min-jun noticed the tightening noose as well. "He's watching you closer," he warned, his voice low as they hid in the shadows of the corridor. "One mistake, and it's over." Her breath shook as she whispered back, "Then we can't make mistakes." But mistakes were inevitable, because Ha-joon was not a fool. The shift came suddenly. It was during a dinner with investors, one of those glittering affairs where she was forced into silk and diamonds, her bruises painted over by stylists. She was smiling on command, laughing at jokes she didn't understand. When she felt it, Ha-joon's hand gripping her thigh under the table. His fingers dug into her skin, hard enough to bruise. "You've been quiet," he murmured in Korean, his voice low enough only she could hear. "Too quiet lately." She forced her lips into a smile, the kind that looked beautiful from afar but trembled at the edges. "I don't want to distract you." His grip tightened. "You could never distract me." The words should have sounded affectionate. They didn't. They sounded like a threat. Later that night, when the guests had left, Ha-joon dragged her into his study. "Tell me," he demanded, his eyes boring into hers. "Where do you go when I'm not here? Who do you speak to?" Her heart thundered. She shook her head.
No one.
"I swear." He leaned in, so close she could smell the sharp tang of whiskey on his breath. "You think I don't notice? The way you move, the way you breathe. You're hiding something." She swallowed hard. "I would never betray you." For a moment, silence stretched. Then suddenly he laughed. A sharp, cold laugh that made her blood run cold. "Of course you wouldn't. Because you know what happens if you do." His smile was beautiful and terrifying. That night, he held her tighter than ever. And she lay awake, knowing the walls were closing in. The betrayal was discovered not by mistake, but by inevitability. Ha-joon's paranoia led him to plant traps within his own empire, false shipment dates, fake codes, fabricated secrets. When rivals acted on the information, he knew. And when he traced the leak, all paths led back to the two people closest to him.
His wife.
His right hand. The night of reckoning came, without warning. She awoke to the sound of footsteps. Heavy, purposeful. Her door opened. Ha-joon stood there, his expression unreadable, his silhouette sharp against the hallway light. "Come," he said simply. Her stomach nodded. She followed, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. He led her to his study. Min-jun was already there, standing rigid, his hands bound behind his back. Guards flanked him on either side. Her breath caught. Ha-joon closed the door behind them. The room felt smaller than ever, suffocating with silence. He moved slowly, deliberately, circling Min-jun like a predator. "My most trusted man," Ha-joon said softly. the one who swore loyalty. And my jewel. He glanced at her. My beautiful wife. Working together against me. Her blood turned to ice. She opened her mouth, desperate to speak. But Ha-joon raised a hand. Don't, he said, his tone sharp. I already know. He stopped in front of Min-jun, his eyes glinting. You thought you could betray me and live? Min-jun met his gaze steadily, his face calm. Kill me, then. Do it. Her heart cracked. No, she cried, stepping forward. Please, it's not. But Ha-joon's hand shot out, striking her across the face. She stumbled, tears filling her eyes. You disappoint me, he said coldly. But you're mine. I don't kill what belongs to me. He turned back to Min-jun. You, however, are nothing. Her breath hitched. No, please, she begged, dropping to her knees. Don't kill him. Please. I'll do anything. Ha-joon crouched in front of her, his fingers gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. His smile was cruel. Anything? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, anything. His gaze lingered on her face, then shifted to Min-jun. Then prove it. Choose. Your life or his. The words struck like knives. She stared at him, her chest heaving, her world crumbling. If she chose Min-jun, Ha-joon would kill her family, destroy everything she had left. If she chose herself, Min-jun would die for loving her. There was no right choice. Only blood. Min-jun's voice broke the silence. Don't, he said firmly, his eyes locked on hers. Don't beg for me. He'll never let you go if you do. Live. That's enough. Her sob tore through the room. Ha-joon smiled, satisfied. Ah, such loyalty, such love. It's pathetic. He rose, adjusting his cufflinks. Guards. Prepare him. I want him to suffer before he dies. The guards dragged Min-jun away. He didn't struggle. His eyes never left hers, even as the door slammed shut behind him. And she collapsed on the floor, broken, knowing she had just lost the only person who had ever seen her. But Ha-joon's cruelty didn't end there. That night, he held her in his arms as though nothing had happened, as though she hadn't just betrayed him, as though he hadn't just sentenced Min-jun to death. You see, he whispered, brushing her hair back. You'll always be mine, no matter what. She lay stiff against him, her body trembling, her heart shattered. Because in that moment, she realized something. She was alive. Min-jun was not. And survival felt like the cruelest punishment of all. The mansion had gone silent after the storm. Ha-joon's rage still echoed in the corners of the room where he had struck her, the glass of wine still staining the carpet red like spilled blood. But instead of killing her, he had chosen a different cruelty. He would make her watch. He would make her suffer the loss of Min-jun, the only man who had ever dared to offer her kindness in that gilded prison. You live, Ha-joon had whispered, pressing his lips to her ear with a smile that was more blade than kiss. But he dies. That night, she lay awake in the sprawling bed they once called marital, her body aching, her heart thundering. She stared at the gilded ceiling, every vein in her hand burning with rage. If Ha-joon thought sparing her life was mercy, he was wrong. It was the fuel. Her eyes no longer wept. They burned. She would not beg anymore. She would not wait for salvation. This time, she would be the executioner. The whisper of rebellion. Min-jun's face haunted her thoughts as she slipped through the hallways the next day, her guards trailing behind her like shadows. He had been her lifeline, his whispers of warning, his stolen smiles in the darkness, his hand brushing hers when no one was watching. Now Ha-joon meant to crush that lifeline beneath his heel. When she found Min-jun later, locked in the armory, his face was bruised, but his spirit still sharp. His eyes widened when he saw her, but he said nothing until the guards left. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. His voice was raw, scraped from screaming through clenched teeth. She pressed a trembling hand to the bars that separated them. He wants to kill you, and he will, unless we move first. Min-jun's gaze hardened, torn between loyalty to his boss and the love he could no longer hide. If we strike, we both die. You know what happens to traitors." She leaned closer, her whisper cutting like steel. "Then let's die killing him. Or we survive it. But we cannot keep living like this." Min-jun studied her face, his jaw tight. At last, he nodded. "If this is how it ends, then let it end with fire." Planning the kill, they met in shadows, in stolen corners of the mansion where Hajjun's eyes couldn't reach. Every whisper carried the risk of discovery. Every brush of their hands was laced with the knowledge that it could be their last. She had access to Hajjun's schedule, his meetings, his dinners, his private vices. Min-jun had the weapons, the inside knowledge of the guards' rotations, the weaknesses in security. Together, their plan formed like poison dripping into a chalice. Slow, lethal, inevitable. The night was chosen, a private dinner where Ha-joon would entertain no guests, only his wife. He preferred such nights. He liked to pretend they were intimate, even as he treated her like a doll that existed to absorb his cruelty. On that night, Min-jun would strike from the shadows. She would distract Ha-joon long enough to make him vulnerable. Then steel would cut through power, and the empire would tremble. It was a plan drenched in desperation, stitched together with trembling hands. But it was their only hope. The dinner of blood. The evening came draped in velvet silence. She dressed herself carefully, the way Ha-joon liked, a silk gown, jewels that weighed down her neck, red lipstick painted like war paint. The dining hall glowed with candlelight, a golden glow that tried to mask the coldness lurking in every shadow. Ha-joon sat at the head of the table, sipping his wine, his eyes gleaming as they traveled across her body. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his tone dripping with possession. "Like something I own." She smiled faintly, the mask she had perfected for years slipping effortlessly into place. Inside, her heart thundered with every tick of the clock. They ate in silence. She forced herself to chew, to swallow, to laugh at his dry remarks. Beneath the table, her hands trembled, her nails digging crescents into her palm. Then, as Ha-joon leaned back, sipping his wine, Min-jun emerged from the shadows. It happened fast, too fast for Ha-joon to react. The gleam of steel caught the candlelight, slicing through the air toward his chest. Ha-joon's eyes widened, rage flashing like lightning, but it was too late. The knife plunged deep. His glass shattered, crimson spilling across the table, mingling with the wine. For the first time, Ha-joon's composure cracked. He gasped, choking on his own blood, his hand clutching at the wound. His gaze snapped to her, betrayal, disbelief, and fury blazing in his dying stare. "You," he rasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "You dared." She met his gaze without flinching. "I was never yours." Ha-joon's body convulsed, then fell limp. The great Mafia lord, the man who had held her life in his fist, lay sprawled across the table like a broken idol. The empire had lost its god. The taste of hollow victory. The silence that followed was deafening. Min-jun's chest heaved as he wiped the blade, his hands trembling from the kill. She stood frozen, staring at Ha-joon's lifeless body, her heart pounding not with triumph, but with something darker. It should have felt like freedom. It should have felt like release. But instead, the taste in her mouth was bitter, metallic, heavy with the weight of sin. Min-jun stepped toward her, his eyes soft now, filled with a tenderness she had longed for. "It's done. You're free. We're free." She looked at him then, the man who had risked everything for her, the man who had been her only light in the shadows. And she knew what she had to do, because freedom demanded sacrifice, and the world would never let her walk away if Min-jun still breathed. The final betrayal. That night, she made the call. Her voice was steady, cold, almost unrecognizable as she spoke into the burner phone. "There's been a killing," she said. "Ha-joon is dead. His lieutenant is responsible. If you want him, come now." The line went quiet. Then a voice answered, sharp and satisfied. "We'll take care of him." She hung up, her hands steady. Her chest ached with something too vast to name, but her mind was clear. When Min-jun entered the room again, his expression weary but hopeful, she met him with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She kissed him once, soft, lingering, filled with every ounce of love and sorrow she had left. Then the doors burst open. The room filled with armed men, their guns raised, their eyes fixed on Min-jun. He spun, shock painted across his face, betrayal cutting deeper than any bullet could. His gaze snapped back to her. "You," his voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "You called them." Tears stung her eyes, but she did not move, did not speak. The gunfire shattered the silence. When it was over, Min-jun lay sprawled across the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes still wide with the hurt of betrayal. He had killed for her. He had loved her. And she had delivered him to death. The woman who walked away. The mansion was quiet again. Two bodies lay cold. Hajjun, the tyrant who had owned her, and Min-jun, the man who had tried to free her. She stood at the threshold, her gown stained with blood, her heels clicking softly against the marble as she walked away. No one stopped her. No one dared. Outside, the night air was sharp, filled with the scent of rain. For the first time in years, the gates opened not to cage her in, but to release her. She was free, but as she walked into the darkness, the weight of freedom pressed heavy against her chest. She had no husband. She had no lover. She had no home. Only ghosts. Ha-joon's cold laughter still echoed in her ears. Min-jun's betrayed gaze burned in her memory. Their blood clung to her skin, invisible but indelible. She would live. She would walk into the world as a woman no longer chained, no longer beaten, no longer owned. But she would never escape the truth. She had survived by becoming the very thing she once despised. A betrayer, a killer, a woman carved by pain and sharpened by vengeance. And as the rain began to fall, washing the blood from the marble steps behind her, she whispered into the night, her voice trembling, her heart hollow. "Freedom has its price, and I've paid it." Then she disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a kingdom of ashes and two dead men who would haunt her forever.